Good evening, everyone. If you all could find your seats, we'll get this show on the road. Get your last hellos in and your schmoozing. All right, so hi, everyone. My name is Mike Weinberg. I'm the president of Temple Beth Shalom, and I have the distinct honor to welcome you all here tonight. It's really great to see you all here. It really means a lot. We have an incredible program for you all, and hopefully you all will glean some inspiration on leadership, have provoke some thoughts, have some questions, use your books to write them down, save time for questions and answers. And don't forget that at the conclusion of this program, we're going to be hosting a dessert ceremony dessert reception in the Welcome Center. So please stick around for that. Without any further ado, I'd like to bring up our senior rabbi, Rabbi Gail Pomerantz, for the Devar Torah.
Good evening, everybody. I feel like I should be on the step. Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming, and thanks especially to Debbie Herschel and Michael Berman for creating this opportunity to raise up our congregation through educating leaders and giving them the tools they need to be effective. Thank you also to our esteemed panel members and to Joanna for participating. So, Debbie and Michael challenged me to open this program this evening by speaking about a model of Jewish leadership. And the truth is, the Torah is filled with so many examples of brilliant and flawed leaders. Joseph, I think of, who designs a winning strategy for Egypt's survival during a famine. Tamar, who flouts convention, yet through her daring acts saves Judah's family and perhaps even the entire people and the entire world to come, the Messiah. These are all such big, big heroes. And finally, Moses, who's considered to be Judaism's quintessential leader because he is both courageous and humble. I could go on, but the point is that there are many different types of leaders, and all of them have different superpowers. Tonight, though, because we're in the midst of the Torah cycle where we're talking about Avram or Abraham, I want to focus on Abraham. So I'm going to shine a light on his leadership skills. And one of the interesting things about God's call to Abraham in last week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, he's then called Avram, not Abraham, is that the Torah doesn't tell us why God chooses Abraham. As if to say, really, it could be anyone who steps up to the mantle of leadership. And all of us have the potential to rise to the occasion. The Torah does tell us that when Abraham leaves home with Sarah, his wife, to begin their spiritual journey, they bring with them people. They don't go alone. They have a whole community of people that they invite to bring with them. And from this, we learn that a good leader is somebody who doesn't stand alone, but who builds a community of people. And that's essential to any mission. We need a team. In this week's Torah portion, when God tells Moses that God's going to destroy all of Sodom and Gomorrah because of their wickedness, Abraham doesn't take it lying down. He has the chutzpah to speak truth to power, even when the power is God. Abraham challenges the justice of God's decision. That's chutzpah. It teaches us that leaders must have the courage and confidence to stand for something bigger than themselves and take risks when necessary. And finally, I want to share one last incident that takes place in this week's Torah portion of Vayera. And it's at the very beginning of the portion, and Abraham is sitting at the entrance of his tent. He's 99 years old, and he's recovering from his circumcision. The Torah takes the pains to tell us that it was the heat of the day. It was the heat of the day when he sees 3 strangers, and he goes out of his way, in spite of his condition, to welcome them generously. He washes their feet. He has a banquet prepared for them. And so it's meaningful to me that this story is set in Abraham's vulnerability. We know he's in pain. We know it's the heat of the day. All of these things indicate a tough situation. Nevertheless, Abraham doesn't neglect his duties even when the heat is on and the going gets tough. Being a leader isn't always easy, right? And Abraham demonstrates these things. 1, we need to persuade others to join us on our mission. 2, it means taking risks sometimes and stepping outside of our comfort zone to do the right thing. As Abraham fulfills the mission God has sent him on, he continues the process of learning and growing, and he ultimately leaves a legacy that we all still draw from today. May all of us find ways to do as God instructed Avraham, v'heyeh bracha, to be a blessing as we go on our individual journeys of leadership. Ken Yeh Ratzon, may it be God's will. Now, oh, no, you don't, no applause. Leaders take no applause. So it is really my great pleasure to invite our moderator this evening, Joanna Gomez, otherwise known as Joanna Stowe.
That's right.
What you don't see, I think, on her bio, it's too little for me to read, but is that she is a longtime devoted member of Temple Beth Shalom, and her 3 children all went to preschool here and have grown up here, and one has had a b'nai bar mitzvah, and others are yet to come. They've been to Israel with our congregation twice. She is an Emmy Award-winning journalist, television personality, and voiceover talent, and currently is hosting The Business Traveler for Reach TV, the largest in-airport TV network, and on-air midday host for Power 96. Joanna is multi-talented, and we're so excited that she said yes when we called. Thank you, Joanna.
Oh, thank you so much, Rabbi. It is a joy to be here. Can you guys hear me? Just want to make sure that the mic is all good. Okay, awesome. You know, it's actually quite interesting. Last week, I hosted an event and a panel for young women, and it was all about leadership right here in our community. So I think it's actually quite interesting because it's something that I feel it is needed. There were a bunch of young women that were intrigued about what it takes to be a leader, what it takes to make it, and not only be a leader when it comes to your career, but also be a leader at home because there's so many roles. So it truly is an honor to be here with all of you tonight. I know you can be anywhere else, so the fact that you are here, it brings us so much joy. We've got a great group of panelists here. Brian's like, we've got some questions for them. We're gonna drill them just a little, not too hard, and they're gonna have a quick presentation. So I'm gonna go ahead and introduce them. We're gonna do a little quick presentation where they will each speak, and then we'll get into some Q&As. And yes, those notebooks that you see and the pens that you were given when you walked in were done on purpose. We need you to write insightful things, anything that makes you maybe say, aha, or if you have a great question that you want to ask Brian or Dan at the end of the evening, please make sure that you write down those questions so you can get to that. So we're going to start off with Brian Bilzen. He's so excited to be here. I can see the eagerness. He's a founding member of Bilzen Zumberg Law Firm with more than 40 years of legal experience. He knows a thing or two about the real estate market here in South Florida, business community. He is really deep has deep commitment to the community and has also become a foundation for his firm's core principle of giving back to this community. So Brian, thank you so much for being here with us. And a man that I don't think needs much introduction, Dan Gelber. He served as a prosecutor here in South Florida for nearly a decade. Returned home, he was elected as Miami-Dade as a Florida state representative and a senator from 2000 to 2010, and he also served 3 terms as mayor of Miami Beach, both members of Temple Beth Shalom. Great husbands and parents. So Brian, we're going to go ahead and start with you. Thank you both for being here. Be careful.
You're not going to find my story in the Torah.
You never know.
And
You never know.
people have pointed out that I don't look anything like the picture of me, which was taken 20 years ago. But I thought if I put in a more recent picture, some of you might not come. So, and speaking of chutzpah, it is the height of chutzpah, which can be a good leadership quality or the mark of a fool, for me to be holding forth on leadership when the guy sitting next to me was a former member of the Florida Senate, the minority leader of the Florida House, and as 3 terms mayor of Miami Beach, a city generally regarded as ungovernable, who, with each of its approximately 80,000 adults having a strong opinion on every conceivable subject, often knowing nothing about it. Law firms are tough too, but we don't have 80,000 constituents, or at least not yet. I'd like to start off with how I define leadership. It is my judgment, the ability to determine a desired result and the path to attain that result. It is often much easier to determine the goal than the path to getting there. And the goals change, but more often the pathways. And it is often the pathways that determine whether the goal should change. The point is that leadership should be nimble and open to all possibilities, but decisions need to be made and made decisively, even if a change from a previous decision. Let me also add that the ability to exert leadership exists in almost all situations we find ourselves: business, family, philanthropy, education, and friendship, although not so easy sometimes in family situations because your leadership skills may be tested in couples therapy. I am a believer in the importance of luck in determining who we become and our abilities to lead. We are born with more or less brain power, to parents who have varying degrees of parenting skills, with our looks being what they are, at least until we can afford a plastic surgeon, and size, genetic makeup, or mutations and health attributes will all play a very important role in who we are and what we become. Recognizing the phenomenon of luck, I submit, should dispel much of the arrogance in leaders. While arrogance is not a desirable leadership quality, it is not in itself fatal to the enterprise, or else a lot of us would not have businesses. However, it doesn't foster workable relationships unless the leader has an abundance of more admirable qualities which make the arrogance livable with. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm a believer in luck presenting the opportunities to lead and succeed. My parents were typical of Jewish parents of the 50s era. They grew up in the Bronx and the Lower East Side of New York. After my father was discharged from the Army and I was born in 1945, my parents moved to Levittown, Long Island. My mother worried from the day I was born and 4 years later after my sister was born about only 2 things. First, whether I'd get into medical school, and was not deterred by my not wanting that. And second, when my sister would get married, which she did, and married a doctor. It was not a typical Jewish home in that my mother was an uncloseted atheist and my father was from an ultra-Orthodox background. He put on tefillin every day except Saturday when he went to shul. In fact, when my dad suffered some financial reversals, my mother opined that was because he nudged God too much. Their deal on marriage was that she would keep a kosher home, which my mother managed by eating treif in our backyard. They settled on a conservative synagogue because even though my mother wasn't going to go to any synagogue, she insisted on having a say. But they both were majorly Zionist. The miracle of Israel was discussed regularly in our home, as was anti-Semitism. My parents were of modest means, but they always gave tzedakah primarily to UJA and our synagogue. Less well known to me until later in my life was that my father was giving tzedakah in greater amounts than he could afford to several black hat yeshivas on the Lower East Side of New York in honor of his father, a rabbi and Rosh Yeshiva. I thought that was great when I found out. They were models for my sister and me, both of us assuming leadership roles in UJA Federation in our respective communities. I went to the University of Michigan, where I did well enough, and fortunately, I went to Boston University Law School, where I met and married Marcia Dick, who was more than willing to change her last name to the more mellifluous-sounding Bilzen. It was always our intention to return to New York to spend the rest of our lives there, which we did upon graduation from law school in 1970, where we both joined different law firms. I went to work at Reuben, Baum, Levin, Constant, and Friedman, where the only diversity that was prized was an equal number of Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews. I thought I wanted to be a tax lawyer, but God saved me from myself because I'm not good enough with numbers. I went to work the first day, and the managing partner told me that they hired someone else to do tax work, and the only thing available was litigation. Since the only thing I wanted less than litigation was to be unemployed, I said, okay. Among my firm's major clients was Steve Muss, the scion of a very prominent real estate family in New York, who was able to foresee that the affluent, aging Northeastern Jew would want to spend winters in upscale apartments on Miami Beach. That answers your question. They built the 5 Seacoast Towers building with 5 imaginative names like North, East, South, and West. And when they ran out of directions, Seacoast Towers 5. Ultimately, Steve bought the Fontainebleau Hotel and built Tower House, Towers of Quayside, and Towers of Key Biscayne. In 1974, a litigation regarding the Tower House broke, and the senior partner of my firm asked me to meet him in Miami Beach on the July 4th weekend. That became a very close relationship between Steve and me that still continues with him at 96 years old. He kept asking me to move down to Miami, and I repeatedly said, when I'm 70, like everyone else. I commuted between New York and Miami Beach from 1974 and 1981, making new friends and representing additional clients. I finally said we would move down to Miami for 1 year, but only on condition that I opened the Miami branch of my New York firm. That took enormous leadership because Marcia said it was the worst idea she ever heard in her life. Obviously, we moved. I loved Miami from the moment we moved here with our 2 sons. Marcia took much longer, 18 years. There were 2 of us who started the Miami branch of the New York firm, the other being a partner from New York whose wife displayed great leadership by leading their family back to New York 1 year after arriving. I would have preferred the Moses model of 40 years to get home, but 18 months after opening, I considered closing the office because I had lots of work, but only one associate to help me get it done. But then salvation. I had been asked to join the Young Leadership Cabinet of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, and at the first cabinet retreat in Chicago, a guy came up to me and said, I know who you are, you have a lot of work, and I have some of the most talented people around. They were all trained in New York. I said to him, but do you have a name? He said, yes, John Sundberg. He and 8 other lawyers became part of my New York law firm, and 5 of those lawyers have been with me for over 40 years. In 1998, I told my partners in New York that we had decided to break with them and start a new firm under the name Bills & Sundberg, Dunn & Axelrod, which ultimately became Bills & Sundberg, Bain & Price & Axelrod. Starting a law firm with 35 smart lawyers is almost as hard as being the mayor of Miami Beach. We quickly decided that democracy may work for countries, states, and municipalities, but not for businesses. And at that point, John and I were making the decision, but we made it clear that anyone could talk to one or both of us if they had an idea or a problem. I believe that access to leadership is imperative, and obtaining buy-in is an important action by the members of an organization is achievable if partners feel that their comments are being listened to. I think it's more important to them that they are heard and understand that their ideas or complaints will be considered. In the face of some of the worst ideas you can imagine, I never said, "You have to be kidding," expletive deleted. This is not always the case with respect to compensation. Compensation is generally measured by what the lawyer in the next office is making. I have always insisted on transparency among the equity partners, and I have found that if comp is transparent and the process is explained, and lawyers can be heard on what he or she regards as an injustice, people are okay, especially if any oversight or mistake is quickly changed. Marcia and I have always been supporters of a number of charities, but when we were younger and both of us were working hard and had 2 kids at home, I found it difficult to actively participate in the executive leadership of philanthropic organizations. That changed in 2008 when it became important to the continued success of the firm to transition clients and leadership to the next generation of partners. They've done a great job. I subscribe wholeheartedly to the view that the first and most important job of a leader is to create the next generation of leaders. At that point, I agreed to become the major gifts chair of Greater Miami Jewish Federation, followed by campaign chair and culminating in the chairship. I've been on the executive committee of the Jackson Foundation, the board of I Have a Dream Foundation, the board of Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a think tank in Washington, D.C., which deals primarily with the security issues of Israel and the U.S. Charitable organizations require a whole different kind of leadership and sensitivities because while judgments and opinions are sought on a daily basis, at the end of the day, the CEO of the organization makes the final decision. Jacob Solomon, the previous CEA of GMJF, was the consummate decision maker. He tried as hard as possible to bring democratic principles to governing a Jewish organization by applying process to every major decision. While he may have known from the start where he wanted a decision to end up, no decision was formalized without running it by his senior staff, lay leadership, the executive committee of the board itself, and the leaders of any community organization which might be impacted by the decision. I remember how difficult the decision was for Federation to take a stand against the Iran deal in 2015. Federation assiduously avoids political decisions because donors come from both sides of the aisle and generally feel very strongly about their positions. Jacob spent days and weeks laboring over whether Federation should take a position against the deal, and because he believed it was so important to the existence of Israel, Jacob insisted in his own way, which often sounds more like a mere suggestion, that we had to. He did not seek to change anyone's mind on the merits of the deal, but just tried to have all the constituencies understand why Federation had to take a position. There is no question that some people were upset, but only 2 donors withdrew their pledges and they ultimately came back. Leadership in philanthropic organization requires a great more sensitivity and patience than in private industry, because if a donor is upset with a decision, a gift may be cut and a potential recipient is affected. Times of crisis provide the opportunities, indeed the necessity, for effective Jewish leadership. This is a time of crisis for Jews around the world. Israel is at war. Anti-Semitism, while always in existence, has gone from the more subtle forms to overt threats and physical violence against Jews in many parts of the world, including the United States and its European allies. Our colleges are not safe for Jewish students, especially as their administrations are rife with anti-Semites. The United Nations and other world organizations have made unfounded claims of genocide against Israel while staying silent on other countries clearly committing genocide. Effective leaders, both Jewish and non-Jewish, are needed in virtually every organization to stop the surge of anti-Semitism and to make the world understand the true facts of Israel's right to exist and to protect itself, and the falsity of the claims being made about Israel. I implore all of you to exercise that leadership in every avenue of life. Being involved in leadership of a philanthropic organization whose goals you believe in is always a very important part of a life well lived, but it is now a necessity to protect the rights of us, our children, and future generation of Jews to continue to live as proud Jews. The consequences of not standing up and leading are, I respectfully submit, dire. Thank you.
What he said. People who run for office and serve in office get an incredible amount of credit for spending other people's money, truly, for voting for things that on any given day any normal person would vote for, and they go, oh, that showed great leadership. I have always believed, and my dad said this to me, among many other lessons, that communities rise not because of government, but in spite of it. Which is interesting from a diehard Democrat. But communities do rise because of citizen leaders who, whatever they do, whether it's building a museum, whether it's building a law firm, running a temple, who just decide that they're going to take something in their world and take responsibility for it. Brian Bilzen has been not just, running a law firm, building a law firm is an impressive thing, but I think far more impressive is being a consistent, direct, authentic, thoughtful, informed voice in a community that needs that sometimes. And I just want to, I'm really proud to be up here with you, Brian. Thank you. Yeah. And I also want to give a shout out to my Camp Coleman people who are here. Debbie Herschel, we went to Camp Coleman together. Rabbi Pomerantz, I was the unit head at Camp Coleman, which means I was Big Poobah. That was my first leadership job. Gail, who is younger than me, but multiples of my age more mature than me, everybody knows that, was a CIT when we met her. Jack Harson was my bunkmate, and while I was doing the stupidest things in the world, he ran the cabin next to me and had his kids, their beds you could drop a coin on and it would bounce just as high. And I will tell you about camp, and my sister was there, Barbara. Yeah, I'll get to her later. But I will tell you this as just an aside. I can tell you in terms of building leadership in young people, honest to goodness, Camp Coleman was where I really got an opportunity to be a leader. And maybe, it's like whether you're the song leader, whether you run a cabin, whether you're just in a group, whether you're the athletic director, there are guardrails. There is a controlled environment, and it's very hard to make a mistake that will live with you forever. It gives you a chance to really flow. The only thing I did bad at Camp Coleman was, I do this thing with little kids where whenever they get hit by a ball or something, I walk up to them and I tell them I'm a doctor, which is a lie. And then I say, okay, put your hand up here, and I have them do that. And I act like I'm fixing them. And then I say, all right, now put your hand up here, and then to make sure it's okay. And then I say, now lean forward a little bit. and they lean forward. They think I'm solving some problem, and I did this with the kid, and it was the thing I always do. He said he hurt his shoulder. I had him lean forward, and then I said, now repeat after me. I'm a little teapot, short and stout. And he started to laugh, and it was great. He had a dislocated shoulder. So, big leadership lesson there. Know a little bit more before you act like a doctor. I also want to acknowledge my wife, Joan, is here, who is one of the great leaders I know. She's a federal prosecutor. She was the criminal chief. She's senior litigation counsel at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Michelle Berger is my chief of staff and friend, and she's the sister I always wanted. And right behind her is my sister. Although I will tell you that my sister is terrific because no other sister would not be truly offended by that joke, other than my sister, Barbara. So I didn't prepare remarks, but I wanted to riff a little bit about sort of what I think might be helpful, or at least you might think less of me, which might be fun. But to tell you a little bit about sort of, I got into public service. I had a path that was pretty set for me because I had parents who were amazing role models. Some of you knew my dad Seymour. Some of you knew my mom Edith. She was a teacher at the high school. My dad was a prosecutor and a judge, and I became a prosecutor and a mayor. He had also been a mayor. I followed a path because, like anything, kids these days don't know what they want to do necessarily, and it's interesting how they alight upon a path. For me, I just had it in my house. I loved what my parents talked about. I loved what they did, and I just wanted to do that. But there were moments when I got lucky. I had wanted to be, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I was in court. I was at Holland & Knight, which is a big law firm, and I was just a new associate, and I was in court, and a guy in the back row watching what was going on, because that's what, first month associates, that's where they sit. And the guy stood up in the case before me, and he said, my name is David Lichter, many of you know him, and I represent the United States of America. And I just said, that's what I want to do. And I felt like at that moment, that was lightning to me. And I said, I must have that job. And I ended up becoming a federal prosecutor. And I'm going to say something that's going to sound self-aggrandizing, but hold off, it's really not when you hear the story. I became the youngest federal prosecutor in the country at age like 24. And how did I get that job? Was I really smart? Was I intuitive? What was it about it that got me that job? Here's what happened. So I was going to be a prosecutor. I sent my resume to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I knew they didn't hire people my age. You usually had to be in a clerkship. You had to have more experience. I was woefully unprepared to be a federal prosecutor. And I got a call to come on and interview. So I go to the interview, and I'm wondering why they're giving me an interview. Honest to God, I'm 24 years old. I have never done anything anywhere of anything of moment. And I'm wondering maybe they've confused me with someone else. So I'm sitting with this panel of 3 people, and they start asking me questions that are sort of odd. How many houses have you had? And I said, I'm living at home. I've only lived at home. How many different houses have you lived at home in? Well, the same house my whole life. And how many places have you lived? I said, well, I lived in Boston when I went to school, and I came back to Miami. And how many jobs have you had? I've had 1 job. Have you ever had foreign travel? And I mean, what kind of questions is that for a federal prosecutor? And I said, I actually never left the country. And they said, okay, go outside. And they called me back in and said, here's the deal. They announced that there's going to be a freeze of all federal employment for 2 years. We have 1 spot, and you are the most unaccomplished person we could ever interview, but because you've done absolutely nothing, you will pass a background check in 6 hours, and you are hired. And that was the beginning of my incredible career at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Wow.
But the truth is, look, what are the qualities that leadership have? And I don't think there is I think everybody can be a leader. I don't think just because you're the mayor, you're a leader, because you can be a really bad leader, right? I mean, you can do terrible things. You can do all the things you wish people didn't do. And I'm not mentioning anything about this last election for at least 1 minute. No, but the truth is you can learn things. And so I've had different times in my life where I learned stuff. And I'll just tell you a couple anecdotes because that might be the only way that I can not put you to sleep and get you to Cafe Avanti by 8:30. So for instance, when I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, I, uh, I, I I did a lot of work there, had great cases, and a new U.S. attorney came in, and he sent out an email to the whole office. Bob Martinez, Roberto Martinez, very close friend now, not then, I really didn't know him very well, saying, I'd like everybody to give me all your ideas on what to do differently. How could we improve the office? And I thought that was a great thing to do. But I also felt like he really didn't know who I was, and I wanted to put myself in front of him a little way. So I wrote him a letter, because we didn't really do emails then, and he wasn't in the office yet, where I said, so all of our pleadings say United States of America versus so-and-so. Everything that comes out of the, but if some people sometimes mistype the N and the I in United, so it becomes untied. The untied States of America, and spell check doesn't capture that. So I think you should program spell check so that untied is now a bad word. And so he became the U.S. Attorney next week. He called me and he said, did you really write this? And I said, yeah, I thought it would just be fun. And he said, okay, I'd like you to be my deputy. And I became a deputy in the U.S. Attorney's office, but I watched him do stuff that always was interesting. Like, for instance, he would take his staff to speeches he had to give. And I was really a top deputy in the office, so I would often go with him. And he would spend the first 5 minutes of his meeting telling whoever the crowd was how important everybody was who was with him, from the secretary to the paralegal to me to everyone. And I watched all these people start to beam and become incredibly sort of happy with the fact that they were so extolled in front of all these strangers. And I watched him develop the kind of loyalty and the kind that really made people want to work for him and want to do a good job. And I watched things like that happen. Stanley Marcus, who was a great federal judge, was the U.S. attorney, and people used to say when he would walk into an office, he would make whatever that prosecutor was working on believe that his case was the most important case in the office. And I always thought that was a skill you have to think about and work on. And when I became, all the jobs I've had, I found that it's to find those people who you can invest and really raise, even if it means that you're a little, that they're same level, can do a lot for you. Michelle Berger is not only a sister, but when she was my chief of staff, I don't know if we had 1,000 meetings together, but I started every meeting by telling everybody about Michelle, in part because I got paid $10,000 a year, and she got paid like $180,000 a year, and she should be doing all the work. But they would then, and then so many times as mayor, we'd have these projects, and I would say to Michelle, well, what's the status of that? Thinking that she hadn't done anything on it, and she said, we took care of that 3 weeks ago. I had 2 meetings, everybody's fine, it's done. And it happened every time, and I realized that it was sort of the lesson Bob taught me, which is leaders, their whole job is to really raise a team to optimize people's work towards a mission. And I felt that that was something that you can never do enough of. And the only way to do that is to make other people important, to make other people feel they're valuable. When I went into the legislature, I had another lesson. And so I was in the House and the Senate, and I ran for the Democratic leader in the House, and I was elected. And you all don't follow probably Tallahassee politics particularly carefully, I'm imagining, because you have to rearrange your sock drawers or watch another Netflix series again. It's the last thing you probably want to do, but a lot of things happen up there. I was elected the Democratic leader, and I had about 42 people that I was now leading. And the first thing I got were a bunch of requests to talk to me about all the decisions I had just made, which were basically to give people office spaces, parking lots, and committee assignments. That was what you first do as the Democratic leader. And their emails to me were nasty. They were all angry, and it was like 20 of them. And I said, okay, I guess I'll just set up a meeting with everybody. But I called up Joan first, and I said, hey, what do you think I should do? Because should I change, and she said, you know the answer to this. Whenever I'm upset about something and you try to fix it, what do I tell you? Don't fix it, just listen. And I said, so I'm just supposed to sit there and take it? And she said, yes. And so for 3 or 4 hours, people walked into my office and screamed at me about the pettiest things, because when you're in the minority in Tallahassee, the one binding thing you have with everybody else is you feel incredibly underappreciated. And that was what I had. All these people coming in, why I don't have a better spot? Why did that guy become the vice chair of that committee? Why do I have this secretary, not that secretary? Just yelling at me like these were all principled problems I had. And then I called up Joan, and she'll remember, and I called up, I said, this was the worst day of my life. I'd just been yelled at for 3 or 4 hours by 20 different people thinking I'm an idiot. And she said, that's what you have to do. And then that night there was some reception, and honest to God, 15 of the 20 people walked up to me, hugged me, and thanked me for listening. I immediately called Joan and said, if I'd known about this listening thing earlier, I would have done it elsewhere. But the truth is that also is something, my wife has always said my best quality is I'm educable, which I don't think is a virtue necessarily. But I do think that that's something else leaders have to do. They have to learn to listen to people, because I think people, especially people in an organization, can sometimes feel invisible, can stew in their frustrations, can give speeches to their bathroom mirror and never to actually the person that matters. And if you take that time to make them believe honestly that you care about them and that you're listening, they will help a lot. I am most proud in the legislature of, in the years that I was the leader, and Marco Rubio was actually the speaker, so we fought every day. But my caucus never bolted from the votes I asked them to take, hundreds of votes. And that doesn't happen anymore because the majority can always offer things. But my people stayed firm. And I'm convinced it was because I believed in them and I let them know it. And I think that is what a leader is really supposed to do. The last sort of thing I'd say is what I always have thought is, and it really came to me in the political jobs more than anything else, especially as mayor. If you look at Facebook posts, I always find it interesting when some political folks, all their Facebook posts are, I did this, I did that, I did this. And I hate that. I hate that. If you look at all of my Facebook posts, I almost rarely will ever use a me or an I. Because I think that the worst thing you can do when you are a leader is to make yourself more important than other people. Because all that does is diminish them, and especially in a collegial body. And so for me, I've always thought, and I always believe this is important, that in any job, a leader is not supposed to take credit. A leader is not supposed to point fingers. A leader is supposed to take responsibility. And that is what I've always believed. And sometimes I fail on that, because everybody fails at things. And sometimes I'm not true to it. But whenever I am true to it, I feel great about myself. Because I feel like I'm doing what my father and my mother would want me to do, to be the kind of leader that they believe they were and that they wanted their kids to become. So for me, those are the only lessons I can come up with now. Maybe more will come from the question and answer, but thank you for your attention.
Sam, Brian. Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to start off with some questions, and I'm going to start off with this one, because I read an article just a couple days ago about power and leadership. And there's obviously a very thin line between both of them, whether you use power and how much power can you use when you're a leader, or is it really necessary? Because you both just said and both spoke about how important it is to make everyone else feel. I'll go ahead and start with you, Brian.
You're looking for the line between power
And leadership. And how do you kind of balance that out?
Well, we all have our own styles.
Of course.
I never tell anyone they've got to do something, except my younger son.
That's inevitable.
But frankly, it is a question of style. I always try to get buy-in from the person that I need to do something by explaining the importance of the job that they're being asked to do. And so, again, the person I'm talking to obviously recognizes the power dynamic, but at the end of the discussion, they feel better about doing it. They feel like they're being asked, they're being respected, And as Dan pointed out, that's goes a long, long way.
Yeah. Dan?
You know, might does not make right. Just because you have power doesn't mean that you're right about what you do. And I'm going to say something extremely controversial now. But this seems to be a problem more with men than women. I mean, it's true. I have been very fortunate to have highly motivated, exceptional women around me my whole life, from my mother to my wife to my daughters, to Michelle, but just to so many. And they don't seem to have the ego issues that interfere with the best decision possible. And some do, by the way, and some men don't, but they don't as much. And I don't know why that is. I really don't, but I feel like it exists, and I feel like it's a good lesson for people, which is if you sort of approach something the way, as Brian just mentioned, and what I just talked about in terms of just let's get it done, let's be responsible to it, that it's much easier than letting testosterone get in the way of just saying, I don't have power over you. We're in this together. I just happen to be the person who's making sure everybody's organized. It's like my daughter Hannah. When she was in second grade, or was it first grade, Joan, when the teacher said, we said to the teacher, you know, our daughter seems to be bossing everybody around. And the teacher said, it's okay, somebody has to organize the other kids. And just to a certain extent, yeah, you need to organize the other kids, but it's not about power. It is about trying to get everybody on the same page and excited about and enthusiastic about what they have to do.
Would you say it's a little bit of an ego thing for men, maybe?
It might be. I mean, look, I think men are raised to think that they have to, thump their chest and make a point more than women are raised that way. And I know I don't mean to mark it in stereotypes, but I think you can see it sometimes in the way that women manage things. It doesn't seem to have the kind of conflict, and not all people do that. But I think I've seen it enough to know that if you want something done, you hire a busy woman.
There you go, that's a good one. How about being born a leader? Or is that something that you can grow into throughout time?
Excuse me. What I said earlier, there are certain traits that we're born with that makes it easier to become a leader. It really is. If you're really very smart and you're really very good looking and you're really very intuitive, people want to follow you.
What if you're not good looking?
So again, I think people that aren't that fortunate can be leaders.
Yeah.
But I think there are characteristics that we are born with. All right, a whole bunch of things that we talked about that make it easier to be a leader and people want to follow you. Great personality helps. People like to be with people who have good personalities.
Dan, you credited your parents for helping you see what leaders are at a very young age. Do you feel, obviously, not only that they helped you with that, but that just made it an easier transition for you to be the leader that you are today?
Well, look, I was blessed. I mean, my parents were really world-class people in a sense that they loved what they did and they provided an example. In terms of leadership, it's interesting because, I had a job once where when I took over the job, I ran the Senate's Investigations Committee in the 90s. And when I got the job, the guy who wanted the job was the deputy, and he was much older than me. And when I got the job, someone said to me, you probably ought to clean house. The group's not working as much as they should. They don't like you probably because they wanted one of their own to get the job. And I sort of thought about that because they're all leaders also. The staff are leaders. They have things they do. They have people that were adhering to them. But then someone else said to me, and I remember this, in fact, it was my boss, he said, sometimes people can flourish when they're given an opportunity that's a little different than what they had. Sometimes you don't know. And I think that's true. And they all became really good. I basically said to them, I called them into a meeting and I said, look, I'm younger than every one of you. You've been on the Hill for anywhere from 15 to 40 years, and I've been here exactly 10 minutes. I said, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that all of you do your work in a way that makes you feel great about it. And I tried to, and I decided at that point that I wouldn't testify at hardly any of the hearings. I'd have them testify. And it worked because they became very good at it. And I think people can become leaders if they have a good emotional intelligence, if they're educable, if their instincts are there. I don't know if you are born with certain qualities that are there, but there are plenty of horrible, handsome leaders. Yeah, they.
That's true.
No, but Mike, I remember someone told me do you remember the Bork and North hearings? Is everybody here close to that? And someone said to me, it was my boss, he said, who was a senator, he said, if Ollie North looked like Robert Bork and Robert Bork looked like Ollie North, those things would have both ended up exactly differently, because one looked like a cherub and the other looked like a child molester, sorry, but he did. And the truth is, though, that those superficial things matter. But I think at the end of the day, over the long term, leadership is consistency. It's where when I was in the legislature, I always knew how certain people would vote because they were consistent. I didn't like it most of the time. But like Jeb Bush, I knew how he would respond to, and he was the governor when I was incoming leader. I fought with him all the time, but I always knew how he was going to vote in terms of what he would agree with and not, what he would veto and what he wanted, because he had a certain integrity about his votes, about his positions. He had a consistency, and I think he projected that out to people. And I always admired him for that, because I think that's nowadays everybody goes with the wind because they want to survive and they want to stay in power. And I thought I liked someone who, no matter what happened, was going to be the same.
So now that you're talking about politics, I just want to ask you a follow-up question, because it obviously has changed. The landscape of politics has changed overall. How do you stay true to your values and who you are while seeing this transition happen?
Well, I've seen this transition before, and I usually find the fetal position is a really good solution. Look, I have always found that, for me, I had a very specific career path. I didn't run for office till I was 40. I had already been a federal prosecutor. I had other jobs. I'd been a private lawyer. I didn't want to have to rely on politics to make my living, because I felt like if I did that, it would be so important to not lose the job that I would do or say anything to keep it. I really went through that analysis myself. And so I waited purposefully because I just wanted to have another avocation that I would like to do as opposed to run for office. So when I was in the legislature for 10 years, I left for 6 and then ran for mayor. And I ran because I remember the night I decided to run. Joan remembers, I rolled over at 4 in the morning and said, Trump won this election. I think I'm going to get back into politics. Because I just felt like I wanted to do something. I did not say that the other night, though. But I think the point is, though, that you have to, if you can't stay true to yourself, especially in a political job, then you ought to just get out of it, because what else do you have but your own ability to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud? And if you can't do that, then you're sort of in the wrong thing. Too many people do that now, by the way. Too many people in politics just want to keep the job. And that we see manifest itself in so many ways in both parties, especially now the Republican Party, because Trump has become such a cult that you can't really, you could say something bad about Biden and it wouldn't get you thrown out of the party. You say something bad about Trump, it's got repercussions. And I think that's just a political reality. So for me, I've always wanted to not have to be an elected officer to feel like I'm comfortable with who I am.
You said you weren't going to talk about politics, by the way. I just want to know that. Yeah. Brian, for you, how have you stayed true to your values while leading?
I think it's easier than being in politics
Well, yeah,
to just
that's
practice
true.
law. I can't represent a client that is going to ask me to do something that I don't believe in. they can't keep me because we don't get along, and it becomes apparent 10, 15 minutes after we meet. So, fortunately, I've always been in a position where I've never had to say, I'm going to do something that I really don't. I mean, I've told clients that something didn't make sense. I've told clients that something was illegal, don't do it. I try not to make moral judgments, though, because people live different lives. When I say moral judgments, if somebody says, to use Dan's expression, I want to go molest a child, I'll tell them that's morally a bad thing to do. I won't represent you. But people who are engaged in activities that I may not think are great, as long as they're legal and they're not hurting anyone else, I don't feel that it's my job to make moral judgments in the practice of law.
So there is an expression, going along to get along. What advice do you have for any future leaders or anyone that's here right now when you say kind of just go with that, just to get along, to touch back on what you were saying?
Well, first of all, I want to amend a little bit of my last answer and say, look, if one of my governing guide rails is if my wife or my kids or the people I love and care about are going to be disappointed in something I do, I'm probably not going to do it because I care more about them and their views than anyone else. Not that the broader electorate isn't important, but they're who you are.
But I'm assuming that did not just come from when that came with confidence, that came with maturity.
I just think it came with the fact that we all live in our own bubbles. And, and I think you have to accept the fact that your bubble has in it people that hopefully love you and you love, and that what they think matters. And I can't tell you, how many times I've talked to my wife about issues, and she's changed my mind, or she hasn't, and, but either way, what she said, what my daughters and sons say, mostly my daughters, though. My son has almost an opinion on nothing I do. Isn't that true, Joan? But what they think means something to me. In terms of the go along, get along, listen, my biggest disappointments in life, every one of them, is the same category. A failure to stand up and say something when I should have. Every time I think about the things I should have done, it's not a vote, it's not, some other failing. It's the ones that bother me are the ones where I had an opportunity to take a position and I didn't do it. And I think that because I was going along, or because I just didn't want to invite the consternation. When during COVID, and I got in a lot of fights with DeSantis, I didn't have that problem because I was almost getting in a fight every day with him over stuff and others. But it was because of this belief I had that if you have a position and you can state it and you have a platform, then you should do it, especially over, and almost always over a matter of principle. Because if you're sitting down and being quiet, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and the position you hold. And I don't always stay true to that, but I think it's something that people should think about.
Has it gotten easier? This is for both of you.
Oh, by the way, age makes it a lot easier, right? Brian will agree. The older you get, the easier it is to say, I've had enough of that. Well, we're almost the same age, but no, but you know what I mean? Isn't it easier when you're older because there's a little more clarity, and maybe you don't care as much what people think. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Maybe you have a thought.
You can elaborate.
No, I agree with you. As you get older and you feel more comfortable in your position in life, it's much easier to take tough positions and say, I don't want to represent you because you're cheating on your spouse. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't say that, but
Right, an example,
we're
yeah.
more selective in whom we represent.
So now this is for you. Can you please tell us some early experiences in your career that have helped define your leadership style?
I think the answer to that it goes back to 1983 when we were setting up the Florida office of the New York law firm. We started from scratch. At that point is when the 13 people from John Sundberg's firm joined. That was the first time that I had to, I had worked at a larger firm. Everybody took care of HR, but we had to take care of everything and have people join us, explain where we were going, and having lawyers do what you would like to do is not necessarily just by asking. You have to give explanations, and that has followed me through. Whenever I want something done, I always explain why it should be done, how it furthers the firm, how it furthers your career. I try to be as transparent as I can. So that goes back, the earliest instance of that was when we were setting up the firm in 1983.
Follow up to that, how much and how okay is it, and this is for both of you, you can answer, to question? And that is probably something of, right, being Jewish, question everything, ask why. How much of that do you do as a leader, and do you encourage people, young leaders, to do?
I don't know if leaders are the people who ask why.
Okay.
I think it is more often the people whom you're trying to lead and trying to act in a certain manner who want explanations as to why something should go the way you're suggesting.
I want to say something about the first part of the question that Brian answered, sort of an early experience. I'm going to go back to Camp Coleman, Rabbi. Is that okay? Because I can't talk about Camp Coleman enough in your mind. So this probably, and by the way, I've never thought this thought before, but I thought it just now. So when I was at Camp Coleman, I was a counselor first before I was unit head. And I wanted to be a unit head very badly because counselors got paid $600 and unit heads got paid $800. And I wanted the $200. I was absolutely mercenary. And so I said to the camp director, I want to be a unit head. I've been a counselor for 2 years. I want to be a unit head. And the unit heads were about 20, 21, 22. And that year, the UAHC decided that all of the unit heads were going to be rabbis. Rabbis, the funnest group of people you could find to run units at summer camp. You were not a rabbi yet. And so, and I was in the oldest kids unit, which is the coolest unit, and the kids with the most attitude, and the counselors with the most attitude. So we got this rabbi who we didn't get the best rabbi, okay? And he was really just not good with the kids or the counselors, and so the counselors started to started to stop working, basically, and just decided they didn't like the guy and they weren't going to do anything. And I was with them. I thought, yeah, let's, And then after a day or two of this, I said I brought the counselors together and I said, we are all here because we like the kids, we like this. Let's just be a unit without this guy. Let's get it done. And I'd never done that kind of leadership before in my life, ever. And I said, we're going to do this. And I had been a counselor for 2 years, and some of them only did 1 year or just new. So I had a little bit of this much in terms of overnight Jewish summer camp seniority. I was a little higher than a lot of the others. And then the summer went very well. We sort of became what's that movie where they go into the army and they lose their, Sergeant Hunker is lost and then they become Stripes. Who's had that?
Mark.
Okay, thank you. Where they like run their own unit for the whole time in Stripes. Well, that's what we became. We became like a unit without a leader. And we did it. And at the end of the summer, the camp director came to me and said, "You're going to be the unit head next year because I saw what had happened and I know what you did." And I had never thought about that, but it was my lesson that I think changed my life for this reason. We all have moments where we just get very frustrated with things. And we decide that the best thing we can do is bitch and withdraw, be alienated, complain, critique. And for me, I was absolutely doing that. But at this one moment, I decided to go a little bit outside of what I typically would have done and try to fix and make it right. And it turned out so well for me that I think I really spent the rest of my life taking jobs where I think I want to do that. And so even in this election, by the way, I'm sorry, because I said I wouldn't talk about this election. I don't think I've done it more than 30 times. I think in my mind, I might want to just withdraw to the fetal position or go watch a lot of great Netflix, or do I want to do something? And I have, up to now, decided I'm going to play a lot of pickleball and do a lot of Netflix watching. On the other hand, I know because of this experience many, many years ago with Rabbi Pomerantz in Camp Coleman, that I probably will find something that I want to do to fix it, even if it's just fixing a little piece of it, even if it's not even doing it successfully. But that's far better than deciding that critiquing and criticizing and withdrawing is better. It's just, there's got to be a way where people engage in that and raise everybody.
That's a good one. Brian, I'm going to go with you on this one. I think that was Dan's probably aha moment, right? Where he figured out like a turning point, maybe, where you say, this is kind of like the style where I'm going to go with. Could you share an experience where maybe you learned to be a better leader? It was from a mistake or just an unexpected outcome?
I think this is going to sound circuitous. I think when I look back on the decision to move to Miami in 1981, which was a great move, but my decision making in reaching that move was all wrong. I didn't do any due diligence about what would happen because I said I was only coming down for a year. I didn't think about what could be accomplished in a year, which was virtually nothing. What it would mean to go back to New York after a year of being away from the firm, what position would I have? I just did it. And I realized that shortly thereafter, when I breathed a sigh of relief when things came together, that I would never make an important life decision without thinking it through and doing due diligence. I was really lucky that this worked out, because it was one of the dumbest things, career-wise, I could have done.
And your wife was probably a little mad at you.
Well, she didn't take it all that well, especially, it was 3 months into the year, and I said, Marcia, I don't think I want to go back.
Well, I'm glad it worked out for you at the end. How important is it, this is for both of you, once you get to that top of the mountain, that part where you were like, this is exactly what I've been working hard so far, to just reach back and pull someone up with you and help them out?
I'll hand it to you in a minute, but I would say that we do that every single day.
I love that.
I go into the office still every day of my life. It's also a selfish act. I like being part of an office and working with people. But one of the reasons that I do go in is that every day younger people, younger lawyers come in to talk. about problems that they're having in their practice, in their life, and we try to reach solutions for them so that they can further their careers.
Yeah. Dan, I know you spoke about how important it is to help the young leaders.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't think, I mean, there are mountaintops and there are mountaintops. I'm not sure. Mayor of Miami Beach is a mountaintop. Okay. But I think, though, that it goes to a different but related point, which is, you know, my dad said to me that the most important things you're going to do as in politics, and he did, and even when this was well before I became mayor, and he was alive when I became mayor, he said the best things you're ever going to do in anything you do will probably never be known while you're doing them. The long view is really the best view because it's the view that matters the most. And so for me, that's sort of long view is about future leaders. It is about future people. It is about the future. It is about your children. It is about young people. It is about how you prepare them and what you think about them. And I don't think there's enough of that these days. I worry with remote working and Zooms everywhere that there's a whole generation of young people that are not getting mentoring because they're just somewhere in a room alone, not getting the kind of interactions that allow them to grow and activate things in their personas, which are really important. So I've always thought it important. When I was the Democratic leader in Tallahassee, I tried very hard to create a whole nother group of not just people who were going to run, but people who are going to run campaigns, who were going to write policy, who were going to care about things. And right now, with my own kids, I see it. I mean, we have our children, two are in law school. One is still a sophomore. He's learning a very valuable lesson because he's at Brown, but he's got his falls. He's in Amsterdam this whole fall, so he's been told to stay at home today and not leave. He's not wearing his Jewish star, and he's wondering what he should do. And that's a tough lesson for a kid, and not one I ever thought my children would ever have to learn in real life. But these are the lessons that they have to learn, and I think it's up to us to sort of bring them to a point where they understand what that view is, what that long view is, because all of them are going to be one day sitting in the chairs that we're sitting in, sort of after we've done a lot of stuff, talking about how we got here, and they have to be able to do that. And it takes work. It's not casual.
Juggling life, juggling work, it's a balance. How do you do it, Brian?
Well, it's much easier to do it now at 80 than it was when I was when I was 28 years old. I don't know that I had a good work-life balance when I was younger. I worked all the time. I was lucky. Marcia was great with the kids, and they grew up. There were bumps along the way, but they grew up to be fine people and productive people. But work-life balance is important, but it's frankly a phenomenon that's more of the current generation than it was of our generation. I mean, when I was practicing in my 30s and 40s, nobody talked about work-life. We just worked.
Why is that?
I think it was just accepted that if you wanted to be successful, you had to work hard, and it just didn't happen. And that's why I said earlier that I really didn't get involved in charitable endeavors until the point came where we really had to transition work to the next generation of leaders in the firm. And then I was able to do more. But and the young men and women today, they really don't want to come into the office. And we try to explain to them that mentoring is as important a part of practice as anything. And sitting and working side by side with a senior lawyer, going through a contract, discussing a deal, Zoom doesn't work for that. Zoom can help you maintain a relationship, but it doesn't create a relationship. And So the answer to your question is I didn't think about work-life balance. I probably didn't have work-life balance until sometime 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think they didn't have work, it's the same reason they didn't wear seatbelts. They just didn't know any better when we were, I mean, this
And
was-
they didn't talk about mental health also. So
Yeah, I mean,
there's
there's a
a
million
lot of
things.
things that have changed, right?
Everybody
Yeah.
talks about all this self-reflection that's
Yeah.
happening in society these days. It's not all bad. Some of it's pretty good. Look, I think it's always priorities, and it's all. I mean, I tell my kids, and I tell people who are thinking about what to do. I always say the same thing. I say the most valuable thing you have is your time. That's all. I mean, that's all you have is your time. And if you how you give it is really important, and you never get those moments back once you spend them. And so try to be a little more deliberate and intentional with the things you love, and don't let something take that from you because you just didn't see it at the moment. Because in a couple years, you're not going to get a chance to fix that. And by the way, I've made those mistakes. I served in the legislature for 10 years where I was in the legislative session in Tallahassee. My wife was a federal prosecutor with 3 young kids and somehow managed to keep the ship together. And I tried to come home, but also being present, not just being there, but being present in that moment is important. And so I think those are the lessons you learn, and hopefully, I'm glad people these days. I mean, it is a little sometimes tough when a young lawyer says, the first thing they want to know is how many days they're not going to be in the office, and you're sort of like, huh?
You just got here.
But I get that, I get it, and I understand it, and we're gonna work through it because it's a new day.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to some Q&A at this moment. If anyone has any questions, I will walk over with the microphone. Over back here. Start with you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan and Brian, you guys are both very funny. And I was just curious to understand a little bit from you how you've used humor in your roles as leaders.
Who wants to make us laugh first? Okay.
So when I was in the legislature, the way it works in the Florida legislature is it's a big, the House, I was in both the House and Senate, but the House, it's an enormous place if you've never been there, and everybody's got their desk and a microphone, and they raise their microphone. And when I was in the legislature, I used to use English parliamentary rules of how I would talk to people. So I'd say, and I did it, and they weren't, and I'd say like, to my fine friend from Defuniak Springs, or to the most respected gentleman from Bartow, Florida. And I would use all these terms, and to really the most southern members and the hardest right members of the legislature. And so in the back of the legislature, there's a members lounge, and it's where they give you all the great food and stuff. And whenever the Republicans wanted to vote that they didn't want us on the floor, they would serve really good steak, and everybody, all my colleagues would be there missing the vote. I mean, that's what, so we would go back there anyway. That's where you go in between sessions or during long sessions. So I was sitting there once, and a couple of these guys, and they, with the thickest Southern accents, I mean, really, one of them said, Dan, you're constantly saying my fine friend and respectfully. Why are you doing that? And I said, so let me tell you the code, I said to them. When I say my fine friend, what I really mean is you're a goddamn asshole. Okay. And when I say most respectfully, I'm saying that's the stupidest damn thing I've ever heard. And so they all laughed. And then for the rest of my career in the House, these guys would stand up and they'd do this. They'd go, to my fine friend from Miami Beach. And like wink at me. But I can tell you, though, that, I think I developed friendships with them. One of them was probably the most right-wing member of the legislature, head of the Christian coalition between the House and Senate. Every bad bill you hate, he did. Dennis Baxley, he'd be proud of that, by the way. But when my mother died, now he was an undertaker, but, but when my mother died, he was in the parking lot waiting for me with Marco Rubio, and they both explained to me that they had heard that you got to be early to Jewish funerals, so they were going to be there early for me. And I always thought that that was sort of an interesting thing, that these guys sort of developed a bond, and it was always humor for me that helped me do that with really all of it, because I think what you said earlier is people like to laugh. It makes them feel good. It gets their endorphins going. And I always thought that that was the easiest way to get them there.
I completely agree with Dan. Humor is an important part of every relationship I have. People want to, especially when you're a lawyer, you're not always talking about the most interesting subjects, but people want to laugh. And I've said to my lawyers, nobody ever comes away from a discussion with me saying that they didn't have a good laugh during it. I don't know what it's going to be, and maybe it's not appropriate, but to the extent that you have a sense of humor, it's really useful in building relationships because people really do want to laugh.
Thank you. We've got one more question. Here you go. You're welcome.
Brian and Dan, let's talk a minute about leadership within charitable organizations. And in leadership in a charitable organization, you have people, committee heads, division heads, volunteers, who you nevertheless have expectations as a leader that they're going to be performing their jobs, things are going to get done. But how do you strike a balance between those expectations and the recognition that these people are volunteers?
And Michael, to add to the complexity of that, these people are also donors. So you can't alienate a donor. I've been in situations when I was chairing Federation, there were people who did absolutely nothing. They didn't complete any of their assignments of people that they were supposed to talk to. And we always thanked them for the great job that they did. Because, again, if a donor leaves the organization, a recipient gets hurt. So I would tell you, you don't have the luxury of chastising a volunteer worker. You just don't. And you have to accept the fact that there will be many who disappoint you. They don't show up. They don't cover the cards. They do all kinds of things. But at the end of the day, you need them. And, you can remove them from a position of leadership and nicely, and you have to make sure that they understand that they really want to be removed from a position of leadership. But there's no judgment or chastising them. Again, we're working for a higher good there.
I think there are centers of excellence in all organizations, and they're always people, right? They're not they're carbon units. Some people are exceptional, and some people just sort of are doing what they want to do, and they're fine. But I do think once you find those exceptional people, you don't need to make somebody who's really not interested rise to the occasion, because that takes more work often in a volunteer organization than just finding the guy who really wants to do it. Very good example in this temple. When I was mayor, Michelle and I wanted to do this general obligation bond. Now, to know what the general obligation bond is, you've seen those signs, you have to understand, in the last 40 years, the city has done 2 general obligation bonds. One was for 20 million, one was, I think, for 50 million. And that's stuff like parks and resiliency and policing and arts. And they had done 20 million 30 years ago, and I think 10 or 15 years later, 40 million. Or 50 million, whatever it was. So we did a geo bond for $750 million. We just decided we were going to give the city a facelift. We were going to fix our resiliency issues, going to change every park, do all the policing stuff we needed to have done, and do an art and culture bond, which had never been done anywhere before. And I needed somebody to take this, other than Michelle, to take this and make it happen. And I looked at our temple and I said, who is a center of excellence in our temple? Karen Revo. So I asked Karen Revo if she would chair this committee, because I'd watched her scare the crap out of people at Temple Beth Shalom board meetings when she was the chair. I mean, nobody crossed Karen Revo because they knew she knew everything and she was going to move the organization. And I asked her to chair this committee, which she still chairs, I think, to this moment. And so for 4 years, she has been driving $750 million of improvements to the city as a citizen leader. But she was a center of excellence. And I, by the way, I could give her another $750 million and she'd be just fine handling it because people who perform incredibly well can do a lot of things. And people who just aren't that interested can't do anything. Sorry to be so blunt.
No, thank you so much. I know that there are still a couple more questions, and we will get to them. We just have some sweets waiting for you. We thank you so much for being part of Pathways to Leadership. And this is the first of the many, because the elephant in the room, we don't really have a woman leader, and there's so many strong women leaders in this community. So this will continue again and again. Thank you so much. Mike, you have some more.
So really, that truly was incredible, guys. That was really great. And I hope you all enjoyed that and got as much out of it as I did, and hope you had your fair share of aha moments along the way that will help you on your pathway to leadership, whether that's here at Temple Beth Shalom, hint, hint, or wherever you find your station in life. Also, as they said, keep your eyes and ears out for more content. My sense is we'll have more events coming out of this initiative, and we sure love to see you there. So thank you again for being here. And to you guys, all the contributors, thank you all for being here, for giving of yourself, and really just doing what you do to just ensure that we had rich content tonight, and we sure did. So thank you guys very much. It means a lot. And finally, I want to thank the Leadership Development Committee, the co-chairs, Debbie Herschel and Michael Berman, and the entire committee. They're listed on the back of the program for putting on just a spectacular event. We know how much energy and effort went into tonight. I saw the work that went on behind the scenes. I know how much thought and care and intentionality that went into ensuring that you curated just a spectacular program, and you sure delivered and hit the mark. So thank you, guys. This is a leadership development initiative. You all are great leaders, and you lead by example. So thank you all for what you do. And now let me turn it over to you all to conclude the program.
Thank you, Mike. So first of all, thank you, Joanna. Thank you, Brian, Dan. Certainly we've all learned tonight from the great stories, from the wisdom. It's really elevated us. And whether people are in leadership positions now, whether it's in the community, whether it's here at our synagogue, whether it's at work, at home, I think we can all gain something from just hearing about these experiences and the great leadership best practices and styles that each of Brian and Dan have articulated today. As for me, I know these stories are going to resonate over time. I'm coming away tonight with a number of nuggets, but I think each of us over time will think of things that will help us and key us, whether we're inspired to take on new leadership roles in the synagogue or things that we're already involved in. And so, again, thank you very much. And, as Dan said, every moment is important. And thank you all for spending the last number of moments here with us and dedicated to help building this community. So thank you. And now, and Debbie Herschel is the most amazing leader and co-chair I've ever worked with. Amazing.
You have lifted us so much tonight, and we want to thank you. And we're really blessed to have you here at Temple Beth Shalom. And we wanted to give you something special to take with you to thank you for your kindness. And so it was hard to think of something that we wanted for you, but we bought you these challah covers. And just like the yeast, all of us need to rise, and we hope that what has happened tonight inspires all of you to rise and find that little bit of leadership that will take you further, whether it's here, whether it's in your business, in your family. Just take those nuggets, like you said, and when you put the challah down, whether you buy it or bake it, just think of how you instilled all that in us. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
By the way, my wife is now happy I came because of the holiday.
Okay, good.